Now that draft appears in more than 50% of Master Rank games, I think it's a good idea to have a bit of a priority tier list on when you should pick which Pokemon. In draft, I got 3 categories right here. First, we have the pick and ban category. Pokemon that should either be banned or first or second picked. Of course, they can be picked whenever as well in draft if your allies or the enemies are letting them open. Then the second one is can be picked whenever. Those are not the highest priority, but picking those Pokemon is pretty much always fine as they most often have multiple different builds that can be adjusted towards the enemy team. And then for the last, we have a counter or a last pick category, which should be Pokemon that should only be picked very late on. You might think this will just reflect the tier list, but in general, there are certain Pokemon that might be high on a tier, but still should be picked probably much later on, which will also increase their win rate in case you pick them later in draft, you know, just adjusting towards your team or the enemy team comp. So let's get started. I think Venusaur can be pretty much picked whenever. It can go top, it can go bot, it can go central. It has a build that's good against melees, it has a build that's good against range Pokemon, Giga Drain against Dive as well, very good. So it's a very flexible Pokemon. Same for Lucario, just very flexible, always a solid choice. I feel like there's nothing ever wrong with picking Lucario. Then a Gengar, definitely more of a counter last pick, right? You want the enemies to be squishy if they have a lot of point and click CC, or they're just, you know, a bit tankier. Gengar, of course, loses a lot of value. Of course, you have Hex as well in case enemies are more tankier, but in general, I wouldn't pick Gengar too early. Same for Absol, I would wait until I see what my opponents have before playing Absol and also see what your team has. Because Absol definitely needs the right team comps to be played in. Blaster is currently one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. It's a no-brainer, should be banned or picked whenever it's open. Mr. Mime, I think is just a very solid choice, very strong Elena, good engage, can always be picked pretty much whenever. Even first pick Mr. Mime, if you like it, is definitely not a bad choice. Snorlax also very flexible, very strong defender Pokemon, good laning phase, good team fighting, can be played whenever. Garchomp is actually quite decent, I would say, but also only if you know what the enemies have, because there are certain games where you will be absolutely useless if you pick Garchomp, so I would definitely pick it a bit later on. I definitely rate him a bit higher though in general as a strength, but when it comes to, you know, when it comes to picking it early on, I can't really recommend it. I would wait. Crustle, another solid Pokemon that can be picked pretty much whenever, even though maybe a bit later into the draft because Rock Tomb can be countered sometimes, but doesn't matter what, Crustle is a great choice. Greninja definitely later into the draft. It depends on what your team has, it depends on what the enemies have by quite a lot. I think Talon is one of the rare speedsters that can be pretty much picked whenever you want to, as it has very flexible builds, and I think Fly and Flame Charge is always good. It can go top bot, it can go central area, so very flexible Pokemon. Charizard, I feel like relies the right enemy team comp. If they have too many unstoppable effects, Unite move is very hard to use, so yeah, would pick it later on. Zaora, this is one of those like just bad Pokemon that, I mean, I think it can, yeah, I don't know, I think it can be pretty much picked whenever, because it doesn't really matter what the enemies have for Zaora to be fine. Compared to Absol or Gengar, I think it's a bit more useful there. Is it better? So this is the bit of the difference between a tier list. I think Zaora is definitely worse than Gengar Absol, but I think it can be pretty much picked whenever, just because of how its kit works, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to any of you, but I think it can be pretty much picked whenever. But definitely not the strongest choice when it comes to, you know, extra strength. But I just want to showcase, like, when you should be picking which Pokemon, in case you like Zaora a lot, you know, you should totally fine playing it if you really want to. Eldegoss can always be played, very strong support. Either picked or banned even, or first or second pick, or just anywhere. Just Eldegoss in draft can be pretty much whenever. Cramorant as well can go top, bot, central, has multiple different builds, depending on what the enemies have. Very solid, same for Pikachu. Another strong choice, I would say, for this kind of thing too. Clefable definitely has lost a lot of power. I think now it's only a counter pick if the enemies have a lot of dive. Gravity is still a great counter to all of those. Otherwise, I can't really recommend. Nighttail's also different builds. Veil, auto tech build, you can also go for a mage build. Can be pretty much, you know, picked whenever. Next up, Wigglytuff. I think Wigglytuff also similar, can be pretty much picked whenever. Just a very solid Pokemon. Slowbro goes out into the first category. Probably should be picked very early on, just such annoying Pokemon to deal with. Comfey, depends on what your team has, right? So you should always wait to see, do you have a Comfey target on your team? If not, then I would not recommend ever playing it, right? It definitely needs the right things to be there. Machamp as well I would pick later on. I would only pick Machamp if your team like really lacks engage, but if the enemies pick too many EVs like early game or something, you're just going to have a terrible time, so I can't really fully recommend Machamp either too early. Scythe as well, I would definitely pick it a bit later on into the draft, just because it also needs to get resets. If it doesn't get resets, or if you're not a god at Scyther, definitely quite difficult. Blissey can be picked whenever. Trevenant, another god tier Pokemon right now. I mean, there's no god tier Pokemon, but one of the best, should be picked and banned every single game. I think Blaziken can be played whenever, can go centric, can go bot. Sometimes it can have a bit of a difficult matchups. I would definitely pick it more in the second part of draft, but yeah, always a good choice. Gardevoir always very, very solid. Urshifu definitely late into the draft, it's depending on what the opponents have. That goes for both Urshifus. I don't know if the other one is in here too. Yeah, there we go. Definitely more of something you need to see what the enemies have. Decidueye, I would also pick later into the draft. If the enemies have too many speedsters, too much dive, maybe too much healing, then it loses, of course, a lot of value, right? So I can't really recommend picking it up too early. Mamoswine. I mean, Mamoswine is kind of fine whenever, just because it's, I mean, I think defenders are mostly always fine, right? So yeah. Sylveon as well. Multiple different builds. Can go top, can go bot, can go central, can go Hyper Voice, Mystical Fire, all very, very good builds. If you go at Greedent, I would still recommend Greedent picking late into the draft though, depending on what your team has. I wouldn't pick it all up too early, but if you play Greedent well, definitely something you can consider. Dragonite, always a good choice when it comes to, but only Central Area. Only Central Area, but that always does the job. Serena though, I love Serena, but I definitely would pick it later into the draft. Also really depends on what opponents have, but if the opponents have very good, like where Serena shines in, this Pokemon gets so strong so fast. Definitely would pick later on. Same for Aegislash. If the enemies have too strong early game, you can't even reach like your power spikes or something. It can be very, very frustrating. Also, you know, these Pokemon like are very bad into stunts, right? Like Garchomp, Charizard, Aegislash, Serena, like all of these are very bad into low of CC. So if you see the enemies have, you know, like already a Pikachu for Volt Tackle, they have Q-Charm, right? They have Ninetales, like I would not recommend picking any of these, right? So that's why they're a bit more last. Hoopa can always be picked. Just a very, very strong Pokemon. I think Duraludon, yeah, I mean, it's fine, but definitely also, if you maybe like Objective Rip, it's something you can consider. So this also means for your team, right? Like, these are like kind of puzzle pieces that you might need, that, you know, fits your team comp in the end a bit more. So if you miss like a Central Area Pokemon, you miss some auto take damage for ripping objectives, maybe some last hitting, Duraludon is definitely a choice you can make. Azumarill, I think, has the same problem as the other ones right now. I mean, I guess Blaziken kind of too, but Blaziken is just a bit of a better Pokemon. And also Blaziken is much better in Central Area, which you can kind of, you know, get a lot of experience for free in. But Azumarill does struggle a bit sometimes now, depending on what enemies have. So I also would pick it a bit later on. I think Delphox, yeah, I would also pick it later on. Delphox really depends on, like, if you play Central Area, you have to be sure you don't get invaded, right? The enemies don't have too strong early game, or you're not going to reach your power spikes. You also have to maybe have an XP share partner, so definitely later on. Glaceon can be pretty much picked whenever. Buzzwole now, definitely wouldn't pick it too early on. If the enemies have bad Pokemon for Buzzwole, it is a disaster. Tyranitar also, definitely a late game or late draft Pokemon that you want to see what the opponents have first. Mew can always be picked, but I wouldn't say it's up here, but definitely can always be picked. Dodrio. So Dodrio, it's very, very strong, but man, if you pick it up too early, you can have some very, very bad matchups. Some very, very bad matchups. It's a very OP Pokemon, but first picking it in solo queue can be very rough, speaking out of self-experience. Scizor too. Scizor is actually quite an amazing Pokemon, but as soon as the enemies have too many special attack Pokemon, it becomes, of course, quite weak. So it also goes down here. Espeon, always a good choice. Inteleon, always a good choice. Can always be picked whenever. Sableye, definitely one of the biggest counter picks in the game if the enemies, you know, like it's something you want to see what the enemies have first. Definitely. Dragapult also goes in later into the draft. Zoroark is an interesting one, because Zoroark, I feel like it's similar to Dodrio, where it's a very strong Pokemon, but you have to be super careful. The only ones that really pick Zoroark early are like one-trick ponies, or people who played with a Comfey. Then definitely can be picked much earlier on, but I would wait to see what my opponents have first. Goodra is just, I mean, Goodra's just a bad Pokemon, like, currently. I would pick it later on. Lapras, I would only pick Lapras if you lack Engage. So this is something to adjust to your own team. You know, if you really miss some hard Engage and, you know, Blastoise is maybe gone or something, and, yeah, then maybe Lapras can be a fine choice. I think Shenlue is always good. Flamethrower is great. Overheat is great, so you can always depend on what your opponents have. If they miss a lot of dive, you go Overheat and Prison. Otherwise, when they miss a lot of range, you just go Poltergeist and Flamethrower. Leafeon, such a frustrating Pokemon to deal with. Definitely pick or ban. It just takes over the game so easily. Absolutely hate playing against Leafeon currently. Then we have Umbreon. Umbreon's always a good choice. Definitely pick a ban. You can see defenders are pretty good right now, looking at this. I mean, those are just very good. Like, starting your team comp with a good defender definitely helps a lot. Gyarados also joins the first category. Currently, I would say one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. And you can't really bully it anymore. So, like, you don't have to be worried first picking Gyarados, because it will bully you very fast. It's going to hit its power spikes very fast. Mimikyu. I think Mimikyu can kind of be picked whenever, but there's some very difficult matchups too. So I definitely would pick Mimikyu late into the draft. Same for like all the problems like that these Pokemon have is just like, you know, too much CC on the enemy team. So you gotta be very careful on what you're up against. Metagross, I feel like kind of similar, but I think Metagross has a... Actually, no, also, I would pick it late onto the draft. I think it's always good to have like a core of like support defender first. But of course, yeah, maybe pick late into the draft. Muscarada can be picked whenever. I don't think it's first ban or first pick material anymore, but definitely can be picked whenever. And Phalanx is interesting. So Phalanx is broken, but it has some insane hard counters, right? So first picking it is kind of bad. I'm just gonna make another category, because I literally don't know where to put this Pokemon. So, like, question mark. So, Phalanx is very broken, one of the best Pokemon in the game right now, but it has some very hard counters. So if you pick it early on, you might get counter very hard. But I feel like beat-up builds can definitely work against them, though. But I don't know where to put Phalanx. You should be careful first picking it, but I think it's so strong sometimes that it also should be banned. Yeah, question mark. Should be banned, should be picked, maybe late into the draft. And I mean, yeah, it's even if you first pick it, you can still win with it, of course. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this list. Hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!